Welcome to your Healing Place podcast with Linda and Mindy. It is our desire to address common concerns of how abortion and faith intersect in order to validate the emotional pain and grief that abortion can bring and give hope that recovery is possible. Well, we're here again with your Healing Place podcast. And Linda and I, again, are joined by Jane Abbate, author of Where Do Broken Hearts Go? And Healing Hope After Abortion, and host of Your Mentor Jane on YouTube. Today, we're going to talk about relational stress, particularly marriage and or that person that you're dating that might lead to marriage. And yet they were a non-participating partner, if you will, in your abortion. So now you're introducing them to this part of your story and just kind of what that looks like and the stress that can come around that. So I know I had this with my husband. He was not the father of any of my children. And my thought was, and I hear a lot of women say this, my thought was, well, I'm just going to tell him and get it over with. If he's going to leave, he's going to leave. I couldn't keep something like that secret. I know some women have a better ability of doing that. That's just not who I am. And so I told him, and he was so kind and so understanding, and it did not bother him. I mean, sure, it bothered him, but it did not deter him. It did not chase him away. It did not change his opinion of me. He still loved me, and of course we're still married today. So I just kind of want to hear from you ladies how that may have played out in your lives.
Well, in so many ways. I would say when I was getting ready to get married the first time after 3 abortions, and I told my husband, or my fiance at the time, who wasn't the father of any of the children, I don't think it registered with him. He had no background, no concept. I think he was fairly sheltered in a way that he just didn't know what to say or what to think. And I was anxious to not make it a big deal. At that time, I hadn't entered into any really conscious healing. And so I didn't anticipate that there could be any problems. You know, the abortions were over. You weren't a part of it. Just want you to know that about my past. So I'm not hiding anything. Boom, let's get married. And what it ended up is trying to navigate through my tirades and rages, sometimes because I was mad at him, but I think more because who he represented, the men in my life who hadn't loved me the way I needed to be loved, or who were the fathers of my children who didn't step in and help me through that. So that was one whole impact on our marriage, and we didn't recognize it as an issue until really it was so late in our marriage, and it ended in divorce. When I was remarrying some years later, I was faced with, oh gosh, kind of like you, Mindy. Well, I might as well tell him now, because if it's going to be over, let's not waste any more time. And he was very loving and accepting, but again, he didn't really know. He didn't know what that impact was going to be. But I had more experience to be able to explain it. And my husband actually became involved in the Rachel's Vineyard program with me.
Wow.
And so he participated in some retreats as a team member. So it wasn't just my story, but he was able to hear other women. And so it helped us communicate better about it. And I think it built more compassion in him for me and understanding. And it also built more respect of me for him, because I saw how his kindness and compassion for women who had experienced abortion. So that's been a real blessing for me.
Yeah. And if there was any doubt at all that, which, you haven't expressed, but if there was any doubt at all in your mind, if he truly has compassion towards you, you saw it as he's giving it to these other women. I mean, that's kind of beautiful. There was impact in our marriage once we got married. It wasn't really before. It didn't happen when I told him, but after we got married, things began to become impacted. And I think those things surrounded just our intimate relationship. A lot of it was me, my own personal issues with that. And then he started to go through a couple things that he had to work through too. So there was some impact in our marriage too. And honestly, I carried a lot of what you're talking about, Jane: anger, rage. Oh, that was my go-to. And I was so angry at who I was and the choices I made. How could I still carried that with me for years into our marriage. And yet that spilled over onto him, because then I would project onto him what I was not wanting to admit to myself about myself, and it was just an awful, awful, messy kind of a thing that we've done a lot of working through. I've done a lot of working through with the Lord and spending time with him. So it does impact your marriage.
I think one way I look at it is abortion has an impact. It impacted my identity. And I remember for many years at the Rachel's Vineyard retreats praying about, Lord, help me to be able to love. Help me to be able to receive and give love. And I had this belief that I was incapable of loving because I had rejected my own child, and that I wasn't worthy of love because of what I had done. And I wasn't capable of love. And so it really messed with that whole concept of me as a woman. And God created us in his image, and God is love. So he's created us with the capacity to love. And he has said, it's back in Genesis at the very beginning, it's not good for man and woman to be alone. So we're designed for a relationship, and yet abortion kind of really did a number on my identity. And so I think I was out sometimes to prove that I wasn't lovable, you know?
Yeah, and
Um,
not to go too far into the identity thing, but I get it. And I think there's other things in our lives that also intermingle with that, and we become this patchwork of identity wrapped around sin. But you know, but all of that does affect our marital relationship. How we see ourselves in our marriage, it really does impact how that marriage is going to move forward, and how, the health of that marriage. And abortion just really messed up how I viewed everything, you know, because my abortions were wrapped around lots of sexual promiscuity. And so, I came in with marriage, not realizing that, what you're doing before marriage and what you do after marriage in fact looks exactly the same. It's just one is unholy and one is holy before God. And once I started to understand that, it wasn't until after I was married and I pulled way back. Oh my gosh, why is that? And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that the things that I was doing are the same. It was the position of where I was at in terms of married or unmarried that was what grieved God, and his heart, and just accepting and resting in that full forgiveness. So it's a hard thing to navigate, but it is navigable. And the best way, I think, to navigate through relational stress is, first of all, go through abortion healing, right? And second, find somebody that you can talk to, whether it's a counselor or a pastor or a pastor's wife or a friend, that can help you navigate some of those complicated feelings that go with that, and draw you to the word. Because again, as we mentioned in a different episode, the word is what cleanses and purifies and makes us clean and whole and healed and renewed and restored, and all those beautiful words that comes through the word of God and through relationship with Jesus Christ. And without that, we won't obtain those things.
And I think
Amen.
most men, when they first find out, when we first tell them, um, like both of you said, compassion, understanding, um, acceptance. My husband was the same way, but they're clueless on
Yeah.
how it has affected us, and going forward to be able to find a place to be able to communicate that, and maybe even inform them. I love Jane, that your husband actually went through Rachel's Vineyard and heard other women, and ways that maybe we can help them see beyond just us. I know
Mhm.
the husband's big thing was, well, let's put it in the past and never talk about it again, you know,
Yes. Yes.
you know, and to be able to
Gosh, that's
help him see that that by me being involved in ministry level of this, what that means. I think in going forward to be able to communicate those things.
yeah.
I know one of the most powerful things is I worked with the National Memorial for the Unborn is
Mhm.
having husbands who were not the father of the baby, but were willing to adopt in a
Mhm.
spiritual sense that child to give them a place where they can actually be involved in taking on the fathering of that child, you know, in heaven by giving him a name or whatever, could be a powerful step of healing as well, I think, to involve them in the healing process.
Good point, Linda. Because when I was going through the process of naming my children, the first forgiveness set free I went through was before I was married, before I ever met my husband. And when I named the children at that point, I gave them very spiritual names. And later on, when I went through surrendering the secret, when we revisited this whole aspect of naming our children, I looked back at those names, and I mean, it was a good 17 years. I looked and I had grown a lot in my faith. I looked back and I thought, why on earth did I name my children that? And then the Lord showed me that I didn't, He did. He gave me the gospel message through my children and gave me at that point permission to give them names I would have probably called them on earth versus those names, you know. And so when I did that, I actually approached my daughter and my husband and said, "Hey, would you like to name one of the babies, one of your brothers?" And because my husband would have raised them all, and so that was a really sweet thing. And while my daughter didn't take me up on that, because she already knew about everything, but my husband did, and he named one of the children, and it was very, very precious and sweet. So you're right, I forgot all about that, Lynn, until you said that. Just involving them in that process somehow makes a big difference because it makes it real to them.
And I just want to say that to the extent that you're listening and you have a husband or a boyfriend that isn't catching on or that doesn't seem to be open to some of the things that we're talking about, that doesn't make him a bad husband or a bad man. And you still need and can benefit from the support of someone who does understand. So listening to these podcasts and being involved in some of the healing programs that Mindy and Linda offer, I really encourage that um, because we need that. And again, it's not good to be alone. And so if we're unable to get what we need from our husbands, um, let's look somewhere else. And the Lord will work on their. It's up to the Lord to work on their heart, and not for us to then become condemning of them or losing respect for them because they don't get it. Um,
And some
I
of
think.
them may have had an abortion with someone else previous. I mean, this goes
Ah.
into all kinds of layers here, and they haven't even begun to deal with their own guilt, much less be able to, yeah, get into it.
So good, so true.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was inspired by the many conversations had through the years with women struggling from the emotional pain associated with abortion. Thank you for allowing us into your healing journey. Subscribe on major platforms where podcasts can be heard. Learn more about virtual abortion recovery healing at www.anevenplace.com. The link is in the show notes.